Okay, without putting too fine a point on it, let's talk about money, Tony. We need to really think about what money is and how it works if we are going to explore cryptocurrency, because we need to understand what a currency is. So let's just quickly do a bit of a recap here, because I think these three important concepts on the slide, I'll describe it if you're listening to the podcast, you don't have to worry. These three concepts are really important. Firstly, we need to remember that blockchain is just a ledger. Ledgers record information. They record important social facts. Economies comprise ledgers. And of course, when you think about it, the law comprises ledgers. We've spoken about this a couple of times. Well, while it is very, very unstructured, ultimately the law in a common law environment, but also in a civil law environment, basically comprises sets of rules that are written down and then interpreted in some way. Interestingly, I was reflecting today, this class has such a long title, Legal Considerations of AI, Big Data and Blockchain. Wouldn't it have been simpler, possibly less sexy, but simpler to just call it legal consideration of databases? I mean, at the end of the day, AI is driven by data. Big data is effectively a study and a discussion of largely how AI is powered, but also it is really about unstructured data and how we use that. And then as we move into blockchain, blockchain is just a form of a database, a distributed rather than a centralized database, but it's just a database. So let's think about what that means. So if we start with this idea that the blockchain is a ledger, it's pretty easy to remember that as the nature of a ledger changes, that society, the economy, and the law changes with it. The slide, for those of you who might be squinting your eyes on a phone or wish to think about it rather than look at it if you're listening along to the podcast, is really just trying to show a timeline for the evolution of the way that ledgers or formats for containing information in particular ways have changed from clay tablets right through to the distributed ledger. So think about ledgers, but what's that got to do with money? So when we think about currency, let's use the word currency, let's be precise here. We can define currency as a system of money that is in general use within a particular country or a particular region. Currency has three main functions. Firstly, it's a medium of exchange. Currency allows us to buy and sell goods easily without having to barter for them. Basically, originally we exchanged goods through barter, and by agreeing a currency or a common value or an agreed value in an instrument of exchange, we got rid of that kind of inefficient and cumbersome process. Secondly, currency is it's a unit of account. It provides a common measuring stick for the value of goods and services. It simplifies trade and simplifies economic analysis at the end of the day. And thirdly, it's a store of value. It enables us to preserve our wealth over time, allowing us to save and invest for the future. So a traditional currency, like the Australian dollar or the US dollar, basically recorded in two primary forms. And we have physical cash, coins, what used to be paper money is now pretty much universally plastic. And then on the other side, we have a digital ledger, which is maintained by a bank. Physical cash, so the banknotes and the coins, are effectively anonymous. And in some ways, they bear similarities to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. A cash transaction doesn't require personal identification, which means that cash transactions are really difficult to trace and actually can be really problematic for governments, particularly in relation to tax collection. How many of you heard, I've got a different price for cash? Don't tell me what you do when you hear that. I don't want to know. What else here? They don't you don't need an intermediary like a bank. If you have cash, you can go to the person or the place where you want to buy something and exchange goods immediately. You can effectively negotiate without having to involve a central authority or a central bank in any way. A digital ledger entry at a bank, though, represents the majority of the money supply that we have. I remember when I was a little kid, opening my first bank account and being able to put some money I got for my birthday into the bank. And I really, basically, I can't remember what it was, maybe $5 or something. I remember putting a little sneaky little blue cross with biro on the note as I handed it over, because it was going to sit there in the bank and somehow it was going to grow and I was going to get interest. Now, by the time I actually withdrew that $5, I wasn't actually surprised that the note that I got was different from the one that I put in. But when you think about it, you put your money in the bank, and every Cops and Robber movie ever has always got a safe filled with cash, but that's not what's actually happening, is it? The bank's actually maintaining a ledger, and when it banks your $5, it's then basically investing that $5 somewhere else, either in assets, investment assets in its capital, or it's basically lending that money to somebody else to do something. And so again, when I bought my first house, I borrowed money from the bank, and some other kid's $5 was in that pool of money. Now, I didn't take it as cash, clearly, because what immediately happened is, and I borrowed that money, I gave it, or I basically transferred it to somebody else who essentially gave me the title for the new house. Well, it sat with the bank because clearly I'd borrowed the money and there was a security on it, but you know what I mean. And they immediately put that money back in the bank, whether it was into their savings account or to repay their outstanding loan. And so the money that sits in the ledger, it's moving around all the time. And so when you're hearing Alan Kohler on the ABC News talking about the economy and talking about what the Reserve Bank is doing, ultimately we're talking about the movement of money and value, and that the rules for banks require them to maintain sufficient capital in order to maintain safety and security, but to have sufficient liquidity so that when people come to take out their money, it's not all invested and locked up in different places, which is ultimately what happened recently with a couple of quite well-known bank collapses in the US. The Silicon Valley Bank, for example, it seems that one of the things that triggered the collapse of that bank is that as the economy was tightening up a little bit, it was getting harder and harder for the companies in and around, tech companies mainly in and around Silicon Valley, to basically draw down on lines of credit from the private equity firms that they work with. So they were actually going to the bank and taking out money that had been deposited. And as a consequence of that, too many people trying to withdraw money at the same time ends up with banks having liquidity issues that ultimately lead to their downfall. Anyway, this is not a banking law course, and I don't want to get us too caught up in this, but I want us to be thinking about actually what money is, and that the money and the currency that we're usually using is effectively recorded on a ledger as well. So digital ledger entries represent the majority of the money supply in the world today. So when you deposit cash into your bank or you receive a direct deposit from your employer, there isn't a specific stack of physical cash allocated to you in that bank vault. Instead, the bank's recording the value of your deposit as a digital entry in their ledger, and the ledger tracks the balances and transactions of all account holders at the bank, allowing for the seamless exchange of a value between individual businesses. So in other words, the intermediary's ledger is effectively the centralized ledger of that currency or of the part of the currency that that particular intermediary is dealing with. And when we look at the blockchain, we end up with this disaggregated, this decentralized ledger that one of the key features of it is to remove that need for the central authority. So over time, we've seen a real evolution in currency as well. So we started off with commodities like gold or silver coins, and we moved through to what is now called fiat money. Fiat money is a type of currency that isn't backed by a physical commodity. It derives its value from the trust and the confidence that people have in in the issuing government or the central bank. So Australian dollar, US dollar, the euro, they are all fiat currencies. In the past, banknotes were often backed by gold or silver. So you could exchange them for a specific amount of that particular precious metal. But as economies grew and the need for more flexible monetary policy arose, countries gradually shifted away from fiat money away from commodity currency systems into fiat money systems. Now, why am I talking about this? One of the key readings that you have, and I will talk about the reading in a bit more detail in a separate video, is essentially looking at the Bretton Woods agreement and system for dealing with currency, and considering the ways in which Bitcoin, or well, not Bitcoin specifically, but cryptocurrencies might be used in a similar way. And so it's important, in order to understand that, to be able to think about, well, where do these ideas come from, and what is this importance what is the importance of the various stages in the evolution of currency? So, as I mentioned before, most currencies exist primarily as digital records on banks' ledgers, and only a small portion is physical cash. Digital records clearly allow for efficient, near instantaneous, but not instantaneous, near instantaneous transactions between parties, and they can rely, they use and they rely on trusted intermediaries, so the banks, to manage the ledgers and facilitate transactions. So something like crypto, any cryptocurrency, and on the slide I've got a picture of the Bitcoin logo. That's really nothing more useful than that. But a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin challenges that centralized model because it offers a decentralized digital form of currency that shares some similarities, as I mentioned earlier, with physical cash. While cryptocurrencies aren't really widely accepted yet as a medium of exchange, I have done it, by the way, but it's not really something that you're going to use to buy coffee with. There is, in cryptocurrency, the potential to really revolutionize the way we think about and we use money. So cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, all of you are in groups now that started off with the name of a cryptocurrency, I think. Each of these represent a form of digital currency that leverages blockchain technology for secure, decentralized transactions. Unlike traditional currencies, cryptocurrencies are not issued or controlled by a central authority yet, although, as you will explore in some of the reading, there are central governments that are considering whether or not they should be issuing their own cryptocurrencies. And these present unique legal considerations because money is something that is highly regulated. And so if we're going to start to use alternatives to fiat money, as it is now, just as when we move from commodity money to fiat money, we are going to need to think about what the regulatory impacts will be. And existing frameworks might not adequately address the novel issues that arise. So over the course of this week, we're going to examine a number of these different things in different ways. So one of the questions comes down to legal definition, and you'll see that in the US and Australia in particular, as you work through the reading, the way we define the thing impacts very much the way the thing is regulated. So if we talk about cryptocurrency as a currency, then the way it is taxed is completely different from if we think about it as an asset. We need to talk about AML-CTF. So AML-CTF stands for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. As some of the early uses of cryptocurrencies were very much packed up in that anonymity and effectively their use on the dark web, nobody is surprised that criminals and terrorists use cryptocurrency to finance and deal with their operations. So just as though there are laws dealing with the financing of terrorism that we need to think about using fiat money, we need to think about how these rules might apply and whether they're suitable and effective when it comes to crypto. Tax I've mentioned already. We will definitely explore some thoughts around consumer protection. Just like cash, when it's stolen and it disappears, you can't grab it back. So we need to think about what that means. And I'm separating out from consumer protection, investor protection. So many of you will have punted away, I know I have, good hard-earned money on investing in cryptocurrency. So what does that mean? How do we have investor protections that are fit for purpose?